My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds or geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic multiverses, mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope.
2012 was a great year. I don't remember why, but we'll find out.
So, Beef Pork Ribs, Stan Lee once said that every comic book is someone's first comic book. And therefore, that same logic must extend to the podcast. So that means that someone is listening to the Bat Jar Podcast for the first time right now, and this is the first episode they're listening to.
I feel like there's more of a statistical unlikeliness for podcasts than for comics, but okay, we'll go with it.
Which is why most podcasts, including ours, have like an intro that explain the kind of premise of the show and what we talk about each week. But if you're discovering our podcast for the first time right now, we're doing something a little different. Normally, we would discuss topical nerd and geek culture pieces of news or new films and new TV shows that have been just released. But for those who've been following the show, they'll know that I've been participating in a program called Exodus 90, which means that I'm not consuming new media. Ergo, it's hard for me to talk about things I have not seen, but not impossible. So in the spirit of this being the start of a new decade, we are dedicating the next several weeks to looking back at the nerd and geek culture from years past, specifically the last decade. And we're calling this the Memory Lane series.
Oh, it's official now.
Yeah, it's been in the show notes, but we don't talk about it on air very often. So
I like it.
Yeah, so it's Memory Lane, and then it's also kind of jokingly like hindsight is 2020 because it's the start of a new decade. We're looking back. So
yeah.
Anyway, all I have to say, so yes, we are indeed talking about the year 2012 today. Looking back on the year 2012 for myself personally, I don't know you, Beef Pork Ribs, but 2012 was kind of a mixed year. I remember that was the summer I had a really hard time finding a job, and I had like 3 different jobs over the course of 4 months. It was not a pleasant time.
I mean, 2012, interestingly enough, is the year I acquired the nickname Beef Pork Ribs, as it is also the year I started playing League of Legends. Which is where I started using the pseudonym Beef Pork Ribs as my League account. And I also had a bit of trouble finding a summer job at first, and then I found it, but it was it was the first time I had a job that was out of town, and like not my first job that wasn't like 10 minutes away from my house or working for an organization I'd been volunteering for several years. So it was also kind of an interesting summer and very intense. Very intense.
Yes, intense is a good word to use to describe my own personal experience of 2012. But let's start breaking into our categories here. So first of all, talking about video games which were released in 2012. Here are the top 10 most sold video games or the best-selling video games. We're gonna try and we kind of get down rabbit holes sometimes, so we're gonna try and keep this concise, talking about giving a bat cookie or a bat noogie. So the 10th best-selling game was FIFA 12. We've kind of talked about the sports games before.
Yeah, it's if you like soccer, it was fun. Everything after FIFA 2000 was pretty decent games in my opinion. If you like soccer, so I'd give it a bat cookie because I like soccer. Okay. But
bat noogie for me.
Yeah.
The 9th best-selling video game of 2012 was Lego Batman 2: DC Superheroes.
Bat cookie. They added a lot of customization. They had all the Lego movies were pretty. Lego short video games are pretty great. It's almost miraculous that they can have so many properties without technically owning them. It's kind of cool how Lego does that. But the Lego video games I've always been a big fan of.
So what's interesting about this Lego Batman is they actually took all the cutscenes and made it, like, basically edited them together to make a movie. And I've seen that movie.
Okay.
And this was also the first Lego game where the characters had voices. Everything before this, every Lego game. Yeah, they just sort of made sounds. Yeah. But here they actually gave the characters voices, which thankfully was a good thing. So yeah, Bat Cookie for me.
Yeah.
I think I might have actually played this game. I can't remember.
I have definitely played this game.
Surprisingly, in number 8, we have Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, which, as we discussed, was the best-selling video game of 2011. But I guess it came out towards the end of 2011, so it did well enough that it is one of the highest-selling games of 2012.
Call of Duty is what it is. If you like shooters that are pretty casual, go for it. But that's a bad noogie for me. Never big shooters guy. Especially, I feel like Call of Duty and the other one,
Battlefield?
Yeah, they kind of just they're very generic. It's like it's during war, whereas something like even like Halo or something a bit more original, like the James Bond games, or something like that has an actual story element to it, or the Metal Gear Solid, like those kind of games that have more of a mission rather than just you're at war, kill people, might be historical.
Bat Noogie for me.
Yeah.
7th place, we have Borderlands 2.
Big old cookie on that one.
So I've never played this, and I don't really understand what it is.
Well, Borderlands is a first-person shooter. Again, one of the good ones. It's kind of has aspects of RPG, as you do have like special abilities that you level up as you go around. It's not purely skill-based. It's also kind of an open world. There is a main storyline which you can beat fairly quickly. But there's tons of side quests. Borderlands 2 is actually the first Borderlands game I played. And the really cool thing was also that you could do co-op campaigns, so you can be up to 4 players playing it at once. Which was the cool thing about it was that it also upscaled the amount of enemies and the difficulty based on how many people were playing in the campaign. So like it wasn't exactly the same campaign as single player. If you had 2 people playing it, there were more enemies, and it was like I think the bosses had a bit more health. I can't exactly remember, but basically that's like from the technical aspect why it was a pretty fun game. The graphic design of it is very almost video game-ish. It has heavy lines. It's very stylized, and it's also happens kind of in the future in a kind of space age / post-apocalyptic. It has very Mad Max vibes to it, which is great, but also like, yeah, it's basically you're on the outlying planets, and specifically you're on Pandora, which apparently
that's where the blue cats are, right?
No. It's where there's this big vault, and there are these people called Vault Hunter, and you're a Vault Hunter, and you're looking for the vault.
All right, I'll give it back. Okay, why not?
It's a great game. And Borderlands 3 came out this year, which is very exciting too.
This is kind of sad. I'm realizing looking at this list, every single video game here is a sequel. So that just says something about 2012's video games, that everything that did well was a follow-up to something else.
But I think it also speaks to video game. I get the feeling, I mean, remembering back then, like even Call of Duty Black Ops 1 earlier I think we did in 2010, like it was still a new Call of Duty game. It wasn't like the first Call of Duty, right? And I feel like especially best-selling video games tend to follow that model, with very few actually breaking out beyond, like, because again, our number 6, NBA 2K13, like there's going to be at least 2 EA Sports, there's 3 this year, like in every year, that are going to take those places for the top 10. There's always kind of those things, and it's harder for indie games to kind of break out, because I'm sure we're missing talking about some fun things like Shovel Knight or Hollow Knight, or those kind of games that were really great and very well received, but they didn't sell nearly as well.
Right. So NBA, I don't play basketball games. Bat Noogie.
Yeah, Bat Noogie.
In 5th place, we have Just Dance 4.
Bat Noogie, I think I've talked about Just Dance generally speaking.
I just think it's amazing that these dancing games keep doing well. But yeah, Bat Noogie for me.
Well, I'm looking at the list again, and just to continue on what we were saying, because a lot of these are sequels, so we might not be talking too much, but these are still the best selling. And I think one of the things, especially, not necessarily 2012, although it was starting, because like Borderlands 2 was very much a Steam game. There was an increase in like free-to-play games that were starting to get popular. I remember this specifically because, again, 2012 is when I started playing League of Legends. League of Legends is a free game, but the company of this free game made enough money to sponsor 6 competitive leagues in the world off of like merchandising and such. So you have to take that into consideration too, that there are a lot of like kind of side games or smaller companies that are making extraordinary games that might be worth looking at. I don't know, maybe in future episodes we'll look at things differently or look at like top indie games from the year, but for now.
All right, you mentioned Steam. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have no idea what that is.
All right, well, Steam is an online downloading / chat. It's basically a way for you to get video games without having to buy them. Well, not without having to buy them, but without having to go get a physical copy. Basically, you can download games, which you do pay for, but also it has like achievements for them. It allows you to connect with the community, and I think, it is worth talking about around now because I do remember when we talked about StarCraft 2, Wings of Liberty, that was one of the first games that still kind of had a CD, but the CD was actually just so you could get a download code to the website. And in the kind of the event of all of this, physical copies of games, especially for PC, have been slowly disappearing, which also factors in to the amount of copies sold is starting to change, and Steam started picking up steam in the early part of this decade actually, and now it's one of the major selling platforms for video games.
Yeah, and we didn't mention last week, but Twitch was launched in 2011.
Oh yeah, and
so I'm sure people who know what Twitch is, it's a streaming platform where you can watch someone else play a video game. So I imagine that if someone is playing like an indie game on there that everyone can access, and you're like, oh, that looks like fun, then it's a kind of free promotion for people to go on Steam or whatever to get that game and play it for themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, it's also a good way for game developers to get feedback. Like on Steam, you can release games that are still in alpha and keep going. There's a game I own, it's called 7 Days to Die. It's been in alpha for the last 7 years.
Oh.
Like they're still trying to figure out the quirks to it, but it's still selling because they made it available and everybody kept buying it. They're like, oh, okay, well, we're going to keep improving it, but we don't need to make a finished product because people are already getting it.
All right, so in fourth place, we have Assassin's Creed 3.
I don't remember which one that one is.
I'm going to do a quick search. Follows the centuries-old struggle between the assassins who fight for peace with free will and the Templars who desire peace through control.
I mean, that's kind of the story of all of them, but I feel like that's the one that gave me vibes of Age of Empires 3, because it looked like it was like alternate history in North America, and it was like...
It says they're trying to avoid the 2012 apocalypse.
Oh. I mean... topical?
Set in the 18th century, before, during, and after the American Revolution.
Yeah, okay. It does have... Because the thing that Age of Empires 3 did is they went from campaigns that used to be historical in Age of Empires 2 to campaigns that were pseudo-history. It's like what-ifs, which is basically what Assassin's Creed is. And it's just kind of like, well, what if during the colonization there was actually these secret societies that were established in America? Which I think is a bit of a tired cliche, and Assassin's Creed was getting a little tired at this point.
Yeah, I'm surprised. Like, there was an Assassin's Creed game last year that did well, and then here's another one, and we're going to talk about some of these other... I'm just amazed these companies kept pumping out video games, and people kept buying them.
Well, I mean, there's a good way and a bad way to do it, and sometimes, you just keep doing it, and it keeps working year after year, but then you run out of ideas very quickly. Which is, what a lot of these games do. Or you can go the Nintendo method and be like, well, we're going to release every time we have a new console, there's going to have to be a new Pokemon, a new Zelda, a new Super Mario Bros., but it's going to be every 4 or 5 years, so they're still going to be good.
Yeah, so I'll give Assassin's Creed 3 a bat noogie.
Yeah, me too.
Third best-selling game is Halo 4. So Halo's come up on this list several times as well.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned the one game we talked about was like a prequel or something. So I'm guessing since this one's called 4, it must actually be.
Yeah, it's actually in the continuity. Fun thing about Halo, you reminded me of it when you talk about Lego Batman. You can actually watch all the cutscenes of Halo, and you still get a pretty good idea of the story. I've never played Halo 4, but I did watch all, like, the movie of all the Halos games. I did air quotes there for those listening. And so I got the whole, the story of it, and it was pretty good. It was Halo 4 still, continued the storyline. It was Halo has always had a pretty stereotypical sci-fi storyline. It's like, oh, now the ancient civilization which created these things has awoken and is trying to fix their own mistakes, but some of them are power hungry. Like, I don't know. There are a lot of very trophic kind of aspects to it, but the gameplay was still good, and I've played this one. The multiplayer was pretty fun, so...
I thought you said you hadn't played Halo 4.
I just remembered I've played the multiplayer. I haven't played the single. I've played it with friends, but I've never played the single player one.
Bat Noogie for me.
I'll say Bat Cookie. Halo is a good franchise.
Second best-selling video game, Madden NFL 12.
Yeah, Bat Noogie. I don't care about football.
Yeah, me too. No offense to anyone who are huge fans of the NFL game franchise. Maybe you can send us an email telling us how they evolve year to year. Anyway, top-selling video game of 2012. The third year in a row, a Call of Duty game has been the highest-selling video game.
Yeah.
This year, it's Call of Duty Black Ops 2. So we spoke when we talked about 2010 that the differentiation between Black Ops and Modern Warfare or just traditional Call of Duty is the time period. So I believe this is like the 60s and the 70s. So I'd imagine it's just a continuation of that storyline and using, I guess, weapons and stuff that were available at the time.
Yeah, I am glad that Black Ops does better than Modern Warfare because, again, even though it's war-centric, it does revolve a lot more around kind of undercover, and some missions are not just straightforward survive the battle and kill some people, but I still don't.
You said when we talked about the first Black Ops that it was better than Black Ops 2.
I don't know if it sold better, but I definitely remember it having a better reception and being more original, whereas the second was like, yeah, we made a second game.
All right, well, that's enough to give it a back noogie for me.
Yeah, same thing.
But this is impressive. I will acknowledge the fact that Call of Duty has been the number one selling video game series for 3 years in a row so far in this decade. We'll see if that trend continues next year. I bet you
anything, Black Ops 2 is going to be on the list for 2013.
Well, we'll find out when we get there. All right, moving on to TV from 2012. I went back and look. It's amazing. These websites I find that like track the most popular TV shows. You'd think that you could just go back year to year to like on their website, but seemingly these different websites don't last long enough or don't kind of track the same kind of information every year. So I went to a different website called shows.com to track the most watched TV shows of 2012. And it's a lot of the same stuff we've mentioned before, so we're going to be brief here. But one of the new shows that was most watched in 2012 was NCIS Los Angeles.
As opposed to just NCIS.
Yes, which will show up later on the list. So I don't know. This is the one that I always call it the show about Robin because one of the stars of NCIS Los Angeles is Chris O'Donnell.
Got it.
Who played Robin in the...
What does NCIS stand for?
That's a good question.
Narcotics.
NCIS. It stands for Naval Criminal Investigation Service.
Oh, so it's like, okay. Yeah. I mean...
I don't know why this show is so popular over other dramas, but whenever I've watched NCIS Los Angeles, it's like LL Cool J and Robin doing stuff. I like it. So I'll give NCIS Los Angeles a bat cookie.
I'm going to give it a bat noogie. Although I don't know, it sounds like it might be more up my alley than NCIS. It just was boring.
And all the other shows that were most watched are things we've talked about before. So
yeah,
Dancing with the Stars.
Noogie.
NCIS.
Noogie.
American Idol.
You'd have to tell me who won because it might have had people who were interesting, but probably a noogie.
And so the big change is that Sunday Night Football is number 1 versus American Idol, which is number 2 this year.
Oh, well, there you go. It's
so this is the year football kind of edged out over American Idol. But it says something again that like these event-based television programs are what are making people go and watch TV, and that somehow NCIS and its spinoff are the one kind of drama, not like televised or scripted TV shows that have a large audience.
Although I think if we looked at it in Canada, being as we are both Canadian, I mean, Hockey Night in Canada probably would dominate or be near dominating the ratings for a lot of those lists too.
Yeah, probably, but. All that
it
to
is
say,
something people still have a tradition of watching.
Yeah, I definitely wasn't watching American Idol at this point, and I definitely wasn't watching football. And NCIS, my parents watch it. So I'll give NCIS a bat cookie. Everything else gets a noogie.
I like it.
Moving on to TV shows that started airing in 2012. We, of course, have to talk about Arrow, which was the start of the Arrowverse. It's a show that I have followed very closely. I didn't watch it when it first came out. I distinctly remember seeing the first promotional shot of Green Arrow, and this was like a year after Smallville had ended and Green Arrow had been part of that show, and I was like, really? They're going to do a show about Green Arrow? I was not into it at all.
I remember people saying the first season was very violent.
Yeah. So
and he actually killed people.
Yeah, like a friend of mine got me into Arrow during the second season, so we kind of binge watched the first season and then caught up to where I was in the second season, after which I started following religiously, and then all these other shows started spinning off out of it, so now it's a huge part of my life. And Arrow just ended about a month ago, so I definitely give it a big old giant bat cookie.
Never watched it, but I do know that Arrowverse has been something that's been pretty great, and I'll give it a bat cookie.
The Legend of Korra started in 2012, which I understand is the sequel to Avatar: The Last Airbender. I have never watched either show. I just know I've seen clips and I've seen pictures and I know it exists.
The Legend of Korra was a decent show on its own merit, but was a very poor sequel to Avatar: The Last Airbender, both thematically and in quality. The first season was meh. The second season was almost unwatchable. And then apparently the third and fourth get better, but I didn't actually watch them. But it had a number of problems, which mostly stemmed from 2 episodes in season 2 where they basically retconned the entire lore of the world. The main character is this massive Mary Sue. She's very annoying. And it would have been an okay show given the time period they chose to set it on. It's kind of roaring 20s-ish, and it was an interesting concept, but it was so far removed from all the things that made Avatar: The Last Airbender great. The tone was bad. The characters were not nearly as realistic, oddly enough, even though they were more adult-ish, and it didn't carry the same weight in gravitas or even the same... I mean, obviously, I didn't watch the later season that did seem to have higher stakes, but the fact that Avatar: The Last Airbender covered one kind of unified arc going against one threat and kind of closed in and of itself instead of having every season a different kind of threat, I think gave it also a big strength.
Sounds like a bat noogie.
Yeah, it's a bat noogie.
Gravity Falls started in 2012. I know Pixel Patch spoke very well of this show, and I made sure to let him know it was on Disney Plus because he was that was like a decision maker for him if he was going to get Disney Plus or not.
I don't blame him. Gravity Falls was an excellent show. Again, this was a show that knew what it was set out to do. Did it? It was 2 seasons?
I think so.
Yeah, it was 2 seasons. It did exactly what it was supposed to. It did it very well. It's amazing. It has a cult following. I have watched all of it. It's amazing. It is really great. It manages to be both a kids show but also an intelligent show. It has characters that are very well written and that work very well together. It has one of the greatest TV villains ever.
This is definitely one I've seen a lot of people cosplay as at conventions.
I was recently Grunkle Stan from Gravity Falls at a convention at G-Anime a couple of weeks back. For one of the days, I was Grunkle Stan.
So having not watched this, I've heard nothing but good things, so I got to give it a bat cookie.
Oh yeah, bat cookie. You should watch it. It's not too long.
Key and Peele started in 2012. Hey, Ron.
Oh man, I
remember watching them when they were on Mad TV and enjoying them on there. So then I didn't watch the show while it was airing, but I kept seeing all the clips on YouTube and people talking about the skits and
Yeah, same thing. Like I didn't watch the show, but I know, I saw it on YouTube, and I love Key and Peele, and it's good that this show happened. I think also because it did give them like they were relative unknowns. Like they were in that Weird Al music video, White and Nerdy. But other than that,
unless you watch Mad TV.
I had never known who they were until Key and Peele happened, and now it kind of rocketed them up, and now they've been doing a lot of things like themselves projects. So Bat Cookie, definitely, because that started it off.
Duck Dynasty started in 2012.
Never watched it.
You've heard of it though, right? It was like super...
A little bit? I'm not sure. Like, I'm not sure if I actually know the premise. Is it just a bunch of hillbillies?
It's this family in the South who are millionaires because they invented this duck calling device that has sold extremely well. And so they're kind of like... It's a reality show called following them as they're like, it's kind of like the Beverly Hillbillies, except they still live in the South. And so it's like they're rich people, but then they also are like down to earth people. And, it was quite a trend in pop culture to like follow what was happening with like the Duck Dynasty character. I say characters, but like there were people.
Reality TV is not that real.
Yeah,
it's characters. I mean, I remember when reality TV was a bigger thing before people started getting more sensitive about like, oh look, we are shoving cameras in the face of all these people just because they have 10 kids. That's kind of weird and causes divorce and problems in the family. But
yeah, so I didn't watch this show, but
I
know people who did. I give it a bat noogie.
I give it a bat noogie. I no intention of seeing it either.
Ultimate Spider-Man began airing in 2012. I do not like this show very much. I remember when it was first announced, I was super excited because I was not just because I'm a Spider-Man fan, but particularly I really enjoy the Ultimate Spider-Man comic books written by Brian Michael Bendis and art by Mark Bagley. I followed that series pretty regularly. And so when I found out that they were going to do a Spider-Man animated show that was like a direct adaptation, or seemingly as a direct adaptation of that, I was super excited. And I found out some of the people who'd been working on Batman, the animated series, are going to be a part of it. And it seemed like it was like going to be a huge hit. And also, the previous Spider-Man show, The Spectacular Spider-Man, I'd been a huge fan of, and it got destroyed by the Disney acquisition.
In a manner that had no ceremonies.
Yes. Anyway, like knowing that this was meant to be the replacement for Spectacular, I was like, all right, Ultimate, I'll go for it. But it was based on Ultimate Spider-Man in the loosest of ways. He was always breaking the fourth wall, and they kind of like had him as being like a part of a SHIELD team with a bunch of other teenage superheroes, and it's a good show for little kids. But I guess this just means I wasn't in the target demographic. But
yes, but there are shows that can still be good even if you're like. I was recently finally convinced to watch Teen Titans Go to the movie, and it's clearly aimed at children on most levels, but it's still an enjoyable movie. It is possible to make kids' TV show. I mean, look, Gravity Falls is aimed at kids, but had such a big adult following because it touched on good themes, it had good characters, and it was a very genuinely good show. Right,
yeah, so I give it a bat noogie.
Yeah, bat noogie. It's possible to make a good kids show. And
actually, this next show is a good example of that. The 2012 version of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I think the thing I'm most excited with this show is that the showrunner of this was a guy in his like 40s who grew up watching the 80s show as a kid, and a lot of the characters they introduced were like based on drawings he did when he was a kid. And so
that's adorable.
Yeah, for like Ninja Turtle fans, it's really cool to see like how it's become generational, how someone who grew up as a child watching the one show was essentially given the keys to the garage for a different iteration of the series. And you can tell even just by watching the title sequence of this show that it pays homage to like the original comics, the 80s show, and like a lot of things that came before.
This was people who knew and enjoyed Ninja Turtles.
Yeah, and it was the only weird thing about the show is they made April O'Neil a teenager. And Donatello had a crush on her.
Well, I mean, Donatello having a crush on her is not necessarily that weird and has been reprised very poorly by Michael Bay, but like there are ways to make it work. Like the way they addressed it in this show worked definitely a lot better than like yeah, okay, let's not rag too much on those movies, but like they were awful. So it was still done with respect to the character.
Yeah. So anyway, if you I know this 2012 series is on Netflix. If you're a Ninja Turtles fan or
watch it. Bad Cookie.
Yeah, watch it. Bad Cookie. And then the only other show that I could find that seemed kind of relevant that started in 2012 was Comic Book Men. It's a show that Kevin Smith hosts where he basically interviews other people who are interested in comic books and they're men. It seems like the perfect show for me, and yet I've never watched it. Have you seen it?
Never even heard of it.
Oh, okay.
I was waiting for you to explain what that was.
No, all I know is that Kevin Smith interviews people on TV.
Okay, fair enough.
So with that explanation, it sounds like a Bat Cookie, but since I can't validate it, I'll give it a Thin Stations Bat Cookie.
I'll give it a Thin Station Bat Cookie too. It sounds like it'd be good.
And now we talk about the TV shows that ended in 2012. This is like the funeral part of the podcast. So
this is quite sad, all of these.
So 30 Rock ended in 2012. I never watched this show.
30 Rock is a great show. I'd recommend watching it.
Did it end on a high or a low? Like, did it end in a good way or a bad way?
No, it ended on a high. It was good. It ended well.
So Bat Cookie?
Bat Cookie for sure.
Okay, I'll trust you.
Like Bat Cookie for the show and for the ending.
Breaking Bad, I did watch the ending of that.
Yeah.
Definitely ended on a high.
Oh, yeah.
Big Bat Cookie.
Bat Cookie. I mean, I personally didn't enjoy Breaking Bad that much, but it ended well and it ended the way it had to.
Dexter ended in 2012.
Never watched it, heard only good things about it.
Yeah,
though, so
same here.
I'll give it a Bat Cookie for that.
Okay, perfect. Fringe ended in 2012.
Same thing as Dexter. Like, I've never seen any of it, but I've heard good things. Not only good things, but mostly good things. But I think it's still enough to.
I think I've seen.
Give it a Bat Cookie.
I've seen episodes from the first season, and it's got John Noble as like the old kind of like scientist guy, and it has that kind of like X-Files, Twilight Zone kind of vibe going on. They're like doing
without quite being that though.
No, it's like
without hitting that level.
It's
of
like
iconic.
quasi, like they're trying to investigate things. That's like it's quasi sci-fi, quasi paranormal.
Yeah, I feel like they were trying to be the next Twilight Zone or X-Files, and it didn't quite work, but it worked well enough to be a good show.
Yeah, so Thin Station's Bat Cookie for me.
I think also because Supernatural was a thing, it didn't do as well.
Green Lantern, the animated series, began and ended in 2012.
Okay.
Very sad. It was actually a very good show, and I think the failure of the movie didn't help this at all.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting take on the Green Lantern lore. Like it showed, there's only one episode where he's on Earth. The rest of the time he's in space going different planets.
Okay.
It did have a weird kind of CG animation that was all the characters were drawn in like the style of like Justice League and whatever, but then it was 3D animation instead.
They were doing that at that time.
Yeah.
I think it's either. No, it's not this one, but there was an anime that was airing, which was Kingdom, and the entire first season was basically completely like CGI'd, and it was good when they were doing large scale battles because it's about the unification of China. So there were a lot of big scale battles, and like I understand why you would want to use CG for that, but then the close-ups were kind of bad at times.
But Green Lantern was a great show. I'm really sad it only lasted the 1 year. There was one particularly good episode where Hal Jordan is traveling with another Green Lantern and a Red Lantern, and all their batteries die, all their rings run out of charge, so they lose the ability to communicate with each other because they're all from different alien races and they don't speak each other's languages.
I like it.
So it's kind of fun, and it shows like how creative they were in their writing.
Yeah. I'll give it a Bad Cookie on your auspices. I haven't seen it, but...
The Office ended in 2012. I never really watched it regularly. I understand that it just wasn't the same after Steve Carell left.
It really wasn't, which is why like I give it a Bad Cookie overall, but the
Did it end? Is it like Smallville and it went on too long? That's I guess what I'm trying to say.
Yes, mostly. But the thing is that most of the characters and what they did still kind of worked, but because Steve Carell was so central to the show, some parts of it didn't. And there were other problems that happened, mostly due to, what's his name? Ed Helm kind of leaving to do the second Hangover, and then coming back, and that kind of being weird because of the place he'd taken. Catherine Tate was in it, and she was great in it, but her role didn't fit the show. Like, her role was great, and I really enjoyed her, but it didn't fit the rest of the show very well. And the last season had some problematic things. So, like, I'd say the finale was okay, but, like, I'd say the end of it gets a bad noogie, but the show overall is a bad cookie for sure.
Yeah, why not? Bad cookie. And Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated ended in 2012.
Yeah,
Did you watch this show?
Yeah, of course. I watched almost every Scooby-Doo iteration there was.
This is probably like story-wise and like detective story-wise, this is probably the best version of Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah, although
despite making Velma and Shaggy a couple.
I mean, yeah, I've What's New Scooby-Doo and the original will both always have a special place in my heart because I was a child when they came out, or when I started watching them. I particularly liked how the original Scooby-Doo had like cheesy 70s love song or 60s and 70s love songs during their chase scenes. Like, that was amazing. But
I mean, this one actually had Casey Kasem as Shaggy's dad, and a literal passing of the torch to Matthew Lillard, who played him in the live action movies and now has become the voice.
It was good.
Patrick Warburton was a cop. Like, what more do you want from a Scooby-Doo show?
Oh no, it was a great Scooby-Doo show. I feel like it doesn't. I enjoy Scooby-Doo a lot more because of nostalgia than maybe because of a critical aspect of it, which is why I don't like it as much as the other ones. It still gets a bad cookie.
Oh yeah, bad cookie. Moving on to anime from 2012.
Oh, I like this stuff.
So once again, we are taking our list from the website My Anime List, and these are essentially the top rated by users. So by this point, I think more and more anime companies were getting streaming rights and simulcasting them to North America. So with a lot of these shows, I was still not in a place where I was watching new anime in 2012. I think it was...
I definitely did not.
I didn't start watching anime subtitled like new shows until 2014. So the shows I have seen, I've only kind of read or watched, I should say, after the fact. So
yeah, like there are shows in this list that I'm excited to talk very shortly about, but like mostly I've watched them afterwards. I was not watching new shows in 2012. I was still trying to get through One Piece.
And in the same with the video games, a lot of the most popular shows are sequels, and we'll talk about that when we get there.
Yeah.
But starting in 10th place, we have Kids on the Slope. I've only ever heard of it.
I have never even heard of it.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. I think it's some kind of drama about kids, like teenagers and whatnot.
Cool.
Bat Noogie.
Sure, let's give it a Bat Noogie.
Number 9. I'm sure you're excited for this.
Oh yeah.
JoJo's Bizarre Adventure.
Yeah. The show that launched 1,000 memes, at least.
I feel like this is one of those anime franchises that has its own like little fan base. Like JoJo fans are a certain group of people.
It's interesting because like yes and no, because there are people who have been JoJo's fans since the 80s, because JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is a very old series. Like the serialization of the manga is very old, but this was like a reboot. Like they did an OVA of part 2 of the manga, which is probably by far the more popular one. But this was like they were committing finally to actually start the series up and committing to do like more than one part at a time. And you know they released Vente Oreo last year, which is part 4. Yes, part 4. So they're still continuing it, and it is that anime was a big part of like a renewal of the interest in it. But it already had a very strong, like very particular fan base, but now it kind of expanded a bit more, which is really cool because the show is it's great and it entirely deserves its title. It is very bizarre, but in a good way. I
appreciate it because it has a very unique art style. Like as soon as you see a picture from the show, you know it's JoJo's.
Is that a JoJo's reference?
Yes, I enjoy how memey it is. How you like it's created its own little kind of like slice of the anime pop culture.
Yeah, but it is actually amazing. Like the thing is that a JoJo's reference is a meme, but at the same time, it's incredible to see how many things were references to JoJo's and how much it had an impact on the anime and manga world even before it had a popular serialization, which I think speaks very strongly to how it became a lot more popular after it started airing too.
So I'll give it a. I've watched a little bit
It's
of
an
it.
entire jar of bat cookies.
All right,
We throw the bat jar at it.
No, I'm giving it one.
Well,
bat
I'm
cookie.
throwing the bat jar at it. It's one of my favorite. It's probably after One Piece my favorite anime.
Number 8, we have From This New World.
What's the title in Japanese?
Shin Sekai Yori.
Yeah, okay, yes. It is what I thought it was.
You've heard of this?
Yes.
Okay, good, because I no idea.
Shinsekai Yuri.
Is it? I tried looking up Wikipedia, and the plot description was really long and in 2 parts, and
because it kind of has a more elaborate plot. I haven't. It's on my list to watch. I haven't watched all of it, but I've heard mostly good things about it. It's
from what I could tell, it looked like it was about people growing up in different generations, and
yeah, it's about growing up, which is really cool. Because I do love anime for the fact that they can do something like this. JoJo's Bizarre Adventure is actually another example. It happens over generations, and it's kind of nice to have something that you can follow characters for longer than you could in live action, because people get older significantly faster in real life than in a show.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, since it's a show you haven't heard of before and you're trying to, it's on your watch list, that's enough.
Oh, yeah. I'll give it a bad cookie because it's...
Yeah, me too. 7th, we have Psychopaths. I have watched the first season of this show.
Okay.
Have you heard of it before?
I've heard of it and haven't watched it.
It's basically a sci-fi cop show where essentially police have a gun.
Oh, yes.
Their guns make a judgment about the person.
And they can't fire unless the person's guilty.
Yeah, so the idea is that the cops are judges as well. It's kind of like Judge Dredd.
From the scenes and synopsises I've seen, it does seem very Judge Dredd-ish, but in anime.
But the I'm trying to remember now because it's been years since I watched this, but the technology that's in the gun is like trying to gauge their emotions and like if their intentions are bad or not. And so like there's, I guess, a lot of arguments you can be making about if that's the good way to judge a person on it. Whereas
because doesn't the main villain is a guy with white hair who has complete control over his emotions, therefore he could theoretically shoot anybody.
Yeah,
something like that.
So it comes off as like a psychological thriller, and you really they get into the idea of like what does it mean to be a criminal, and
it had some in a lower key, very Death Note-ish tones to it, in the sense that it's like 2 characters who have diametrically opposed ideologies about justice that are trying to play them out and are in conflict.
Yeah, and I think
one of them has an unfair advantage on the other one because he's abusing the existing system in order to make it better instead of trying to work from the inside, which is also another recurring theme in some
and
ways.
it's a bit like Minority Report too, in the sense that people can be punished for something they haven't committed yet. So if you guys like that kind of thing, Psychopaths is great for you. I'd give it a bad cookie.
Yeah, me too.
Number 6, Kuroko's Basketball.
So I haven't seen the show.
I've heard of it.
I've watched the first. There are two, to my knowledge, 2 or 3 episodes of the abridged series, and it's Something Witty Entertainment who voices Kuroko. That's the guy who did Sword Art Online abridged. It's great. The actual show, I like it because it's it's
a very typical sports shonen show.
It is a very typical sports shonen show, but it doesn't shy away from almost being a superpower show, which I like. Because there's basically 2 routes you can go if you're going to do a sports anime. It's either be super, hyper realistic and make it very good based on your characters and the fact that they have real life struggle, or you go a little too far into making your players almost superhuman and basically superhuman, which is what happens in Kuroko's No Basket. Is these guys are at a level, they're high school students that are at a level and maybe a little higher than professional NBA players.
Yeah,
and so it has. If you watch it, you need to have a slight suspension of disbelief.
So I'll go with the bad cookie. Why not?
I'll go with a thin bad cookie. I don't like sport animes that much, except for a few exceptions, but it was decent. It was watchable.
5th, we have Space Brothers. Now this is a show I've heard of and I've seen pictures of, but I've never watched or read it.
I've never heard of Space Brothers.
It's basically about a pair of brothers
in space.
No, it's they're 2 brothers that want to be astronauts. One succeeds and passes whatever test you need to take to become an astronaut, and the other one fails.
But then the one who succeeds dies, and the one who failed has to take his place?
No.
Oh, okay.
But it's like one of them. It involves. It mostly follows the brother who didn't make it to space, trying to essentially go through all the process of becoming an astronaut again, so we can get to space like his brother. Because it's kind of set in the future, so the idea is that his brother made it. His brother went to the moon, and now he wants to go to Mars. I think that's how the setup is. So it seems like a really good story about brothers. So in the spirit of my brothers, who are not with me right now, I will give this a bad cookie.
I'm very callous, and I don't like my brother. No, I love him, but nah, it doesn't say. If it would have been about brothers in space, the way Space Dandy is about a dandy guy in space, then I might have given it a bad cookie, but I'll say it a soft bat noogie.
Number 4, Bakuman Season 3. Now, Bakuman is like one of the most meta anime manga you'll ever see because it's a manga series that's about manga artists trying to become popular in the manga business.
Yeah.
And so then when you get to the anime, it's an anime about manga artists trying to make manga that can get turned into anime.
Yeah, it's a fascinating story if you have any kind of genuine interest in the way that mangas are made, because it is very strong and it does give you, I think, levels of appreciation for the medium that you don't have. Even if you have some information, it does kind of like, it's one thing to know, oh yeah, Ichiro Oda hasn't missed a chapter, went through like something like the first 3 years without missing a single chapter. It was every week. But to think about the effort that took, like especially as a like starting artist or something, like it's insane what they go through.
Yeah, and Bakuman is so impressive because it's so much of the text of the story is like describing, oh, this is what a good shonen series should be like, while also in itself being a good shonen series. And they like come up with like stories within the story that would also be good stories on their own.
Which I also think is cool as a meta commentary because it's both saying like what the stereotypical shonen things are, but also not being that, which I think is really cool, but also speaks kind of volumes about one of the things I love about a lot of shonen that become popular. They do tend to deviate in some way from like the very traditional series. Like series that become popular for a long time tend to have something that's special about them. And that's what I like that this both highlights and doesn't.
Yeah, so Bakuman Season 3 gets a big bat cookie for me.
Yeah, Bakuman generally gets a bat cookie.
And the top 3 anime of the year are all things we talked about last time. So Natsume's Book of Friends is still Season 4. Noogie. Fate Zero, the second half of Fate Zero aired in 2012.
Ooh, cookie. It ends very well.
Yeah, we talked about it, bat cookie. And Gintama is considered the top-rated anime of 2012.
I'm really genuinely surprised because I feel like Gintama globally doesn't get enough love, and here it is at number 1. It makes me very happy.
This is, of course, anime fans like ranking this, so it's like they're the ones who are most invested in it.
True, but I find that even within the anime community, it's like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's been a lot more recent that people started talking about it, so I'm glad they are, and it looks nice.
There is one anime series that was extremely popular in 2012 that was nowhere near the top ratings in this list that we should at least mention. That, of course, being Sword Art Online. It was a huge... It kind of restarted the whole isekai, trapped in a video game phenomenon. When it came out in 2012, I was introduced to it through the English dub that came out in 2013. And having never really invested in those kind of stories before, initially was very interesting. And then it just moved at a lightning pace, and then it got weird, and I was like... I finished it, but I haven't really kept up with the show and its successive seasons, so... I know our friend One Shot is a huge fan of the original novels for Sword Art Online. I don't think
I heard that they're a lot better.
Supposedly, but that as far as the anime is concerned, it's a bat noogie for me.
Oh, I thought it was a overrated piece of garbage, but it gave birth to one of the best abridged series of like the third wave abridged series in Sword Art Online abridged. You guys, if you don't know what an abridged series is, they take clips from animes and then they redub them and tweak some of the characters to make them funnier or different. And Sword Art Online abridged exceptionally what it does that a lot of other series just like kind of parody or satirize the original series or just change it completely to make it hilarious. Sword Art Online fixes a lot of the plot holes and character problems that made Sword Art Online kind of forgettable, and that make that series make sense, and B, a lot better and actually more grounded. Because even the events that appear random in like the actual anime make sense within the context and within the changes they make in the original series. So,
and
go check it out.
Just a couple anime movies that came out in 2012. Wolf Children.
Yeah.
Big old back cookie for me. I really like it.
It was cute. Super cute.
There was a series of Berserk movies that came out in 2012.
So they got better. The first one was awful. The second one was meh. The third one was good. And their purpose was to reboot Berserk. And the problem is that the rebooted version of Berserk that came after those movies is terrible on basically every aspect, and it did more harm than good to the series, which I'm very sad about. And again, it was like a lot of bad CGI animation in it, which is like the first movie was awful, and they kind of moved back towards part CGI and part 2D in the second and third movie, which is why they were not completely terrible. For those who have any idea what Berserk is, it basically covers the Golden Age arc, which chronologically, technically, is the first thing that happens in Berserk, but not where the manga starts.
It's a real medieval fantasy,
but like
violent.
Yeah, I think Game of Thrones, but twice as violent and a lot scarier. 10 times as violent and a lot scarier. Actually, it's really
Bat Noogie for me. I could never get into it.
I'll give it those movies a bat noogie, but please understand that Berserk was a great series, and I give it a bat cookie.
And even Galeon 3.0 came out this year.
It was 3.3.3 technically, but
right. Well, anyway, I haven't seen it.
The third Evangelion movie, which is cool because it is. So basically, what they did, it was an iconic anime series, and then they decided to make 4 movies to kind of redo the series. The third one kind of hits the end of what was canon in the original series. There's a 4th one that has come out now. But it's basically doing the same story in movie forms. It's quite good. I like it. But I think the movies are kind of detached from what the phenomenon of the original series was. So even though I gave it a bad cookie, I think it's mostly because it's reviving something that was very good.
All right. Well, I haven't seen it yet, so I'll give it a bad cookie. Why not? And finally, we're talking about movies that came out in 2012.
The beginning of the rise.
So we're going to go through the top 5 grossing films at the box office, and we'll hit on some other movies that came out that year. So in 5th place, the final time we'll have to talk about this, The Twilight Saga Breaking Dawn Part 2 was the 5th highest grossing film of 2012. Thank goodness this franchise finally ended.
I feel like part 1 was with the one with the CGI baby, so I'm just going to say Bat Noogie without speaking more about it.
It is interesting, though, like if you look at the numbers, it made a little more than part 1, but part 1 was like the 3rd highest grossing film of 2011, whereas this is the 5th highest grossing film of 2012, so it just says that there were other movies people were interested in seeing.
Oh, yeah, and they definitely, the other 4 movies are... We'll talk about it.
So Bat Noogie for me.
Oh, yeah, Bat Noogie.
I don't want to talk about Twilight anymore.
All right, so let's move on to...
4th place, Skyfall.
Yeah.
I still haven't seen this.
Skyfall saved the Daniel Craig franchise for James Bond. I still don't like Daniel Craig as a Bond. He's still my least favorite Bond. But Skyfall
Even more than George Lazenby.
He did one movie. It wasn't great, but at least it wasn't forgettable. It wasn't completely terrible, which Quantum of Solace was. The movie before Skyfall was god-awful and probably one of the worst James Bond movies ever done. Whereas Skyfall kind of revived the storyline. It gave some good grounding. It gave a good end to Judi Dench as M. It was a good story, and it was well constructed, and it was able to connect the mythos and the lore of the 007 of James Bond, and the villain was great. So big old back cookie for that. It did very good for
And
what
it had a good
was.
theme song.
Yeah.
In third place, I'll give it a back cookie. Why not? In third place, we had The Hunger Games.
Oh, God.
So just as one young adult book adaptation series was ending, another one was rising.
How it
take
made
its place.
110 millions more than Skyfall, I cannot fathom.
So I have yet to watch any Hunger Games movie in its entirety. I've watched half of what I think is the second one. So, but
I haven't watched any of the movies, but
I understand the general premise of the Hunger Games. So it's got everything those like young adult kind of books have. It's like a fantasy, sci-fi, futuristic setting, and
post-apocalyptic-ish.
yeah, and there's like a ruling class of people who are kind of making decisions about how the normal people are living their lives, and it's I guess it's interesting, but
Is it though?
it's never been interesting enough to get my attention. So
I read the books because I had a crush on a girl who recommended them to me. And I never would have if that had not been the case.
this really made Jennifer Lawrence a superstar.
Yeah, and I mean, her general contribution to Hollywood is still a net positive for now. What she has done has been declining in quality, in my opinion, but, it was still... And the first Hunger Game book was a decent concept, so I believe the movie probably held it well, although the movie was made knowing that they would make a sequel.
Yeah.
So I feel like there might have been a bit much of like the setup for it in the planning, which might have, bumped away from the kind of the victorious parts of which was in the first book, because it could have been a standalone thing, I think. Also, Battle Royale exists. It's a Japanese movie that has a very similar concept and is way better.
Yeah, so we're gonna have to talk about Hunger Games again in the future, probably.
Yeah,
so
we'll just give it a bat noogie when it comes around again.
Bat noogie for now. The second highest grossing film of 2012 was The Dark Knight Rises, the finale to the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy.
And by far the worst.
By far the worst.
By far the worst.
I don't know. I find it more interesting than Batman Begins at times. I think it's maybe because I've seen Batman Begins so many times that it just starts to become predictable. I think what hurts Dark Knight Rises' box office performance is, of course, there was the infamous shooting in Aurora, Colorado during the opening weekend where and some people were killed, and unfortunately it just kind of like hung a shadow over the movie that like people were afraid to go see it, and it didn't end up doing as well as The Dark Knight, the film that came previously, but also it didn't have as much of the same buzz around like Heath Ledger and the Joker. And
I mean, it also like they were trying to set up Robin / Nightwing, and that never amounted to anything. And the ending.
Yeah, I don't like the ending.
I understand what they were doing, and I understand that Christopher Nolan was going for a self-contained trilogy. But at the same time, why would you pick a series that's been ongoing, like a character that has had ongoing art and arcs and storylines for so long if you wanted to make a complete, like a closed off sort of story?
Yeah, I've spoken ad nauseum on this show about this movie's story in our conversations about movie Batman, the Dark Knight trilogy. Like, we've talked about this to death. I will say I thought Tom Hardy as Bane, great performance. The voice was
previous Banes.
Voice was stupid.
Yep.
It took me like 3 times seeing the movie before I finally understood all his dialogue.
I have not seen this movie more than twice, so
I enjoyed how they were able to adapt the No Man's Land storyline. If you're a big Batman fan, you know that No Man's Land is a big storyline from the comics, and they found a way to kind of adapt it for the movie, so that was interesting. But even Batman couldn't defeat our number 1 movie, Marvel's The Avengers.
Yeah. That's a thing.
It was a very big thing.
It was a very big thing. It still is a very big thing.
Yeah, I mean, do you remember? I remember sitting in the theaters at the end of Captain America, and then they show like a little teaser trailer for Avengers, and it's just kind of shots of just different people turn their heads, and you see a couple of shots like people standing in the room together. And there's a lot of moments in the movie where you're like, wow, these characters who I've seen in other movies are in the scene together. They are interacting with each other, and it was really the first fully concrete example that this Marvel universe they were building involved so many different characters.
And it worked, more importantly, because there's been attempts at doing things like this before, but this one worked, and worked well, obviously. And yeah, The Avengers was a great movie. I still like it, and it still managed to set up, like, up to Phase 2, like, oh wait,
This is the end of Phase 1.
The end of Phase, okay, so it set up all of Phase 1 in it. Like, Tony Stark saw, you know, where Thanos' armies were coming from. It set up the way to introduce Guardians of the Galaxy into it. It had kind of everything was there, and yet, despite all this effort to set up things, it didn't feel like it was lacking anything as a self-contained story and as a way to treat the characters, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, and there's surprisingly, even though this is kind of a culmination of 5 films that came before, anytime I've sat down and like rewatched the Avengers, it actually is still very enjoyable. It's
yeah, you don't have to like. I feel like it does actually work as a standalone film.
Yeah, it does. If you've seen all the movies, there are all kinds of like subtle references and Easter eggs that kind of, it's like, oh yeah, that thing happened in that movie, and it helps you kind of like, it makes you realize that they're not totally ignoring the different films that have come before. But yeah, it is self-contained enough that, unlike a lot of Marvel movies that came later, where you feel like you're missing something if you haven't seen this movie or that movie, you can just watch The Avengers and somehow just enjoy it as it is.
Yeah.
Like if you never watched Thor, they give you enough about who Thor and Loki are to each other in The Avengers that you can kind of get that without having seen it.
Yeah.
So it is very impressive, and like very, kudos of course go to Joss Whedon for being like the director who somehow made this happen. And I'll be frank, I never really cared anything about the Avengers. Like reading comic books as a kid, it's like I'd rather read Spider-Man and X-Men than the Avengers.
True.
But this movie all of a sudden had me caring about
even
them.
in movies, X-Men were still the biggest Marvel like X-Men and Spider-Man were still the bigger Marvel franchises, but now it no longer was the case.
Yeah, there's like, I can remember one specific moment in the movie where I remember being in the theater and being like, wow, like this is a thing now. There's a moment where after they've had their little fight in the woods and the camera pans back and you see one shot where it's Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America all in the same shot, and they're all kind of like at a distance from each other, and you're like, wow, like this is a thing.
This is happening.
This is happening now.
Yeah.
So and I don't think it's not my favorite Avengers movie, but it certainly is one of the 4 of them. It's not the worst one, which we'll eventually get to talking about when the right year comes around.
Spoilers, it's Age of Ultron.
So it's very impressive that, yes, the big plan that Marvel Studios kind of concocted paid off. After 4 or 5 years of planning and putting everything together and releasing movies about very obscure characters, they released The Avengers, and it became the most successful film of the year.
Yeah, Bat Cookie for sure.
Giant Bat Cookie. Talking about some other films that came out the year, we have The Amazing Spider-Man, which of course was Sony's attempt to keep Spider-Man alive
and out of the MCU.
Out of the MCU after
it almost worked.
Yeah, so they
actually it worked for this one. The first Amazing Spider-Man I think worked. They're like, yeah, okay. The idea that Garfield was a little too competent to be Peter Parker was a little distracting, but honestly, it was still a good movie and it worked. And it hit the right beats. And I liked it. Yeah,
it's not a perfect movie, but
no,
I enjoyed like the more kind of grounded take they took with the character, like the scenes of like Peter arguing with his aunt and uncle and stuff like that. I thought that was like just quality acting, and you could take that out of context, and it's like,
although it did start the tradition of Aunt May becoming consistently younger in every iteration.
Yeah. And I just remember also like that summer, even though like I was doing really terrible job-wise, it was like, wow, I get to see a movie about Batman and Spider-Man and the Avengers all in one summer. Like that was cool. The Amazing Spider-Man costume was not very great. That's like the one thing I'll say about its sequel I like is the costume. But anyway.
There were other decent things about the sequel.
Yeah, so I'll give it a Thin Stations Bat Cookie.
I'll give it a solid Bat Cookie. I actually enjoyed that one.
Brave came out that year. I never saw it.
I also have never seen Brave, but I have. So my sister went to see it, and she came out with an opinion I've heard echoed by a lot of people, which was, it's cool that they're trying to have a strong, independent girl character who doesn't need a prince, but it detracts a lot from it that none of these people were worth getting married to or even considering. Like, because, and it kind of falls into the thing, you know, having only one choice is this, or making an impossible choice is the same as making no choice. Like, if all your options are bad, then your rejection of the options is not a strong statement. It's just self-preservation. It's, to put it in slightly more religious term, like discernment is a choice between good options. If you wanted to show that her being strong and independent and not needing somebody was a good thing, she had to be able to reject something that would equally be good, and she doesn't.
Yeah.
So and also, however, Pixar theory, the witch is what's her name from Monsters Inc. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I know what the Pixar theory is, but I don't know who you're talking about from Monsters Inc.
The little girl, I can't remember.
Oh, Boo?
Yes, Boo is the witch, and that's how they all tie together.
Bat Noogie,
that is cool.
Bat Noogie for me.
Oh yeah, it's still a Bat Noogie.
The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, 8th highest grossing film of the year, came out in 2012. I never saw any of these Hobbit movies because I was never a huge fan of Lord of the Rings. But I know that all the Lord of the Rings fans I know, including yourself, despise these Hobbit movies.
I'll say the first one was the least objectionable. It's a Bat Noogie, and I was expecting great things, and Guillermo del Toro was supposed to be the director, and it would have been great and different from Lord of the Rings, but they didn't want it to be different, so they sacked him and got Peter Jackson to make Lord of the Rings 2.0, but with like a third of the time, not even, like less than that, and no pre-planning put into it. So it just ended up being they ended up being bland movies, which is terrible because they could have been great movie. It could have been a whimsical adventure. It could have been something great, but instead it just became, let's try to make it look like Lord of the Rings, but without being able to make it look like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, Bat Noogie for me too. Surprisingly, Ted is one of the highest grossing films of 2012. This is, of course, the movie about Mark Wahlberg and a crass teddy bear voiced by Seth MacFarlane of Family Guy fame. Have you ever seen this?
I have not seen it.
I
don't care to. There is maybe one day we'll have a discussion about why American humor sucks, but American humor sucks, and this is a good example of it.
Yeah, at the time I liked it, but with hindsight, Bat Noogie.
Yeah.
Madagascar 3, Europe's Most Wanted. Never saw this one.
Never. I saw the first one and Penguins of Madagascar, the movie, and that's it. And
Bat Noogie
honestly,
for me. The concept kind of wore itself. I think I saw the second one where they were in Africa or something like that.
I may have seen it, but I don't remember.
Yeah.
Like, I know it exists, and I know there's like a thick hippo in it, but I don't remember it actually happening.
Yeah. Bat Noogie.
Yeah.
Wreck-It Ralph came out this year. It finished 13th at the box office.
Still pretty good for...
I didn't see it for the first time until, I don't know, whenever we covered on the podcast a few years ago.
Yeah, I think, like... I haven't seen it, but I've heard mostly good things, but I think it's kind of like...
You haven't seen it?
No, I haven't.
I'm surprised.
I feel like it has a similar thing to like Scott Pilgrim, where like the people who saw it really loved it, but it wasn't enough people who were interested in seeing it because they didn't know about it at first.
I mean, it ended up getting a sequel, so...
Yeah, but I feel like that's based more on like DVD sales and later on rather than its box office success.
I think that's fair.
Yeah, which, you know... Again, it's a similar thing with like Scott Pilgrim. It's like it did very poorly at the box office, and then the people who watched were like, "No, this is actually a great movie." And then the DVD sales came in, and it's like, "Oh yeah, no, this is good." And Edgar Wright started becoming known, and thank God.
And the only other movie that came out this year that I really had an interest in discussing briefly was Argo, which went on to become the Best Picture winner at the Oscars for 2012.
I have no idea what it is.
It finished in 25th at the box office the year. It was directed by Ben Affleck, starred Ben Affleck. It was about the Iranian hostage crisis from 1979 and how this how the CIA sent essentially these people in pretending to be a movie crew to extract some Americans.
I remember seeing a trailer for that.
Yeah, so it comes off as a very interesting movie because essentially the CIA has to pretend to make a movie. They have to go to Hollywood and essentially set up a production office and make it seem like they're making this movie, so that when they go to Iran, they can say, "Oh, we're shooting here, and these are our crew, and they're trying to extract these Americans who are like part of the American embassy there."
Sounds interesting.
It was interesting.
I've never
and
seen it.
people in Canada don't appreciate the movie because it, like a lot of adaptations of real events, it really changes the story a bit. In reality, the Canadian embassy actually did a much larger role in keeping the Americans safe, whereas they have a much smaller role in the movie. And
I mean, America loves to rewrite history in movies, let's be honest.
yeah,
Pirates of the Caribbeans and like almost anything. They're doing it a little bit less because they want to sell movies in China these days, but it's still...
yeah. So I give Argo a bat cookie for sure.
I'll give it a bat cookie, why not? Didn't see it, though.
So in summary, talking about 2012, a lot of, across most of these categories, sequels were continuing to be a big thing. It seemed that, I think by this point, people are starting to realize what was popular and what people liked, so they're just sort of making more of that.
Yeah.
And it certainly was a huge thing, especially when you consider like things like the Avengers happened this year and what that meant for movies as a whole. Everyone post this was trying to do their version of the Avengers. Sword Art Online, everyone was trying to do their version of Sword Art Online after this.
And most of them did it better, or at least aspects of it better.
And a lot of these kind of like, I would say, were big shot TV shows ended, so then we created a void that we'll see next year if it actually was filled well or not.
Yeah.
But you know what will be unfilled right now is the Bat Jar, because we're going to look at our mail. We have a Facebook message here from Paul Rouleau that was sent on a few weeks ago. So if you look at the bottom.
The last one. Please talk about the animated film The Prince of Egypt.
So
I don't know. Prince of Egypt is a great movie. I very much enjoy it, actually. I would be down to talk about it.
Yeah, I haven't seen the movie in a while, so once Exodus 90 is over, definitely... Well, I mean, it'll go in the Bat Jar now, and then, you know, who knows, maybe it'll get pulled out sooner rather than later.
With the big boys now.
All right, so if you want to get a hold of the show like Paul, we can tell you how to do that.
If you want to contact the show with a question or idea for an episode, you can send us an email at... batjarpodcast@gmail.com. Or you can tweet us at...
The Bat Cookie Jar.
We are available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcasts. Share our posts on Facebook, and make sure to like our page because we want everybody to join us inside the Bat Jar.
Exactly. We have a YouTube channel, so if you prefer to listen to video podcasts or watch video podcasts, we're not being recorded.
At 1 million subscribers, we'll get a face cam.
Yeah, there you go.
I said it. It's canon.
Yeah. So we want to thank everyone for listening. We thank you for sharing us with your friends. And thank you for joining us this week for this conversation about 2012. Next week, we're actually going to take a little pause from our Memory Lane series because Sonic the Hedgehog is getting his movie out in theaters.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm going to take a little break from not watching TV to watch this movie. I feel like as fans who protested so hard against the way the Sonic looked, we have a duty to go see the movie. So there you go. Come back to the Bat Jar podcast next week when we talk about the Sonic the Hedgehog movie. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
And I'm Beef Pork Ribs.
Catch on the flip side.
And keep your eggs sunny side up.